I read Alliance by Dwain Worrell. This is the sequel to the book Androne. It makes up a duology. I'm going to be talking about both books, so if you don't want spoilers for them, you should stop listening. So, as the follow up, this is also a kind of time travel science fiction war novel, and it follows Harmony from the first book. Like the entire first book is from Paxton's point of view, and this book broadens out into multiple different characters' point of view, but primarily is Harmony's story with a supporting role, I would say, from Paxton. And then we also get her sister slash best friend, kind of Gemini. So when Androne leaves off, there's the idea of a jailbreak being in the offing for Paxton. Somebody is coming to get him. And the way that Alliance starts off is with an alliance that Harmony is making with the Chrono Church, like these people in the future who worship time itself and who have a strong sense of what's going to happen in the future. They have prophets who are able to accurately tell the future because the future is so deterministic that, like they have actually plotted out what's going to happen, and they have a very strong sense of timeline to what is going on. And the event that we see happen in the book is actually the 99 event. So this tells us what happened, to cause the first book to happen. So this is kind of the inciting incident, which happens at the beginning of the second novel, which is a really creative, interesting choice, I think. Like usually an inciting incident is the first thing that you encounter in a story, but here it's kind of like smack in the middle. But Harmony is thinking kind of strategically that like, hey, we're going to pop off the 99 and hopefully this stops the past's capability from attacking us in the future. However, if that doesn't exactly work out, I know that this is going to create a situation where our location can be traced because she's sending up a satellite signal that's going to go back in time. It's kind of using the same signal technology that the Andrones use to remotely see the future. She's sending those commands backward in time, and that's going to let her take control of military hardware that's going to execute her commands and cause the 99 event that takes out almost all military infrastructure around the globe in a single moment. So she knows that that signal can be tracked by the same people who are controlling the Andrones and have been fighting this war for her entire life. And so she wants to kind of like attack the place in the past that they are piloting the Andrones from. And that attack is what the NSA believes is an attempted jailbreak of Paxton. So it actually has nothing at all to do with him. It is them trying to break into the building in order to kill the actual pilots in their nest eggs or whatever, their little pilot pod things. So you can see right away that there's like a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of events that are kind of like they're doing like a kind of future history thing. It's a little bit confusing. They have a sense of the determinism of time. And so they believe that like events cannot be changed or, like they study the culture of the future. And so they have a sense of like, oh, okay, this is what they intend, or they misunderstand this about the past. And therefore they make these cultural choices, blah, blah, blah. And so they're trying to interpret the actions that haven't happened yet, but are definitely going to happen of the people in the future of Harmony. And they think that she's going to try and save Paxton because they see a connection between Peacemaker and the Collaborator. But it's just a coincidence that he was being jailed in that building. It had nothing to do with it. So removing him doesn't accomplish anything for the NSA. It doesn't like stop the attack or whatever. And also the attack itself is unsuccessful, and they still get the signal tracked and they get ambushed. And it turns out that Harmony has to kind of like play possum to not get killed while she's there in the church. But then suddenly all of the andrones just stop working and fall to the ground. And when she goes outside, she sees that there are thousands and thousands of trails across the sky as all of the satellites, the satellite network of the past, is falling down to the earth simultaneously. And this is because the church piggybacked on her hack of the satellite signal and built in a command for all of the satellites to go to ground on this day at this time, which aligns with a prophecy that they made. And basically, the war is over because the andrones can no longer be commanded since there is no satellite to bank commands and then give those commands in the future. So now the past cannot have an influence on the future any longer in that kind of weird dialogical direct way that was happening in Androne. And Harmony is not sure how she feels about this. Like, she's pretty happy that the war is over, but she doesn't like that the church immediately tries to assert political control over the situation and say like, oh, now we are the de facto leaders. And because you are the one who were like the prophesied one and you delivered us into this circumstance, you can have anything that you want and we will grant it to you like magnanimously. You could, which puts them in the position of having the most power, right? If somebody can give you something, then they must be more powerful than you. She sees this very disturbing thing happen where there are these people who are raised to not have a personality, it seems like to me. They dress in a very plain way. They just learn a lot of information about like the prophecies and stuff, but they don't talk, they don't make friends. It's almost like a medieval anchorite kind of situation. And the purpose of these people is that they make a kind of remote connection to the God of time that the church worships. And then the God is able to speak through them. But this connection has so much energy and radiation to it that it kills the individual that the God is using to speak through. And this is really disturbing to Harmony. And it makes me think the human is almost like an androne in the same way that Paxton was steering them from the past. This God from outside the universe or something is able to like reach into this individual and then pilot them for a while and like speak through them, communicate through them, and give direction to the religion that is carrying out its plan for the future. But after it does that, then the person dies in exactly the same way that like later in the book, Paxton will be driving all of these andrones and he'll be not trying to preserve the individual andrones. He's just like going to be very reckless with them in pursuit of his goals of winning the battles. And so he'll kind of like kamikaze them through various battles into his enemies and use the actual body of the androne as a weapon in itself. And so in the same way, the God uses up its own follower in communicating with the church. And so I don't know, that's just like a parallel that I see there and kind of speaks to the way that institutions are using individuals in both of these instances. I think there's supposed to be a kind of narrative link between the military and the church here. You're supposed to not like the military and in the same way not trust the church because they're treating individuals this way. And so anyway, all of that to say that Harmony, for her one thing that she can have, asks to have the person that the god spoke through, she didn't die in the experience. And they're like, well, she's unclean now and she's of no use to you and blah, 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 blah. And she's like, I don't care. She's a person. I want to bring her with me. And so that's what they do. They go off into the new world that is free of war, and Harmony goes and to a necromancer is what she calls it, and tries to use him to contact her foster mother in the past. And so this is a capability. This is a really interesting idea because, of course, the androne technology has been communicating across what seems to be hundreds of years to execute the military campaign. But the local people in their own time have been using the same technology to bounce signals through time off the satellites and communicate within their own lifetime to relatives or whoever they want to talk to, loved ones who might be dead. And so her foster mother is dead in the time that she lives in, but she's able to communicate with her in the past, and they can talk to each other through a video feed. And we also find out here that the necromancer, quote unquote, is a guy who studies what they call poetry, and it's like clearly rappers and other musicians from our own time that are now venerated as great masters of rhyme and poetry in the future. And they're studied by some religious sects as having like either deep wisdom, the way that we would study like Psalms or Proverbs in the Bible, or just straight up prophecy sometimes. Which is like, I love that world building touch. It's really interesting, and it makes you think about like the things that we revere from the past and how people in the past would probably look at us askance and be like, that guy? Really? That's the guy? Okay, that's weird. But 1,000 years later, you're like into that guy. Not to be down on any of these rappers or anything like that, like I just think it's great that he like, it's probably some of Worrell's own favorite musicians or something like that, and he throws them in there and he's like, yeah, these are the Shakespeares of the future. I love that idea. But in any case, her mother tells her, like, she tells her mom, like, I did it. I saved the world. I ended the war. And her mom is like, what have you done? This is like the exact opposite thing that I raised you to do. You failed to do what you were supposed to do. How could your sister Gemini allow this to happen? Where is Gemini? What is going on? And on like that. And she's like, you're just serving the church of time and you're a stooge. And so this launches Harmony into a quest of trying to figure out what her mother is talking about, why she's disappointed in her, and it's confusing for her. And at the same time, she's trying to get this prophet girl, like an actual personality, to like trust herself and be a whole person instead of being this traumatized mute who waits for God to speak through her. And then Gemini is going with her on this quest as well. And then the narrative switches back to Paxton. We find out more about what's going on with his new job. And basically the NSA just considers him to be the best pilot of all time for the drones. And they want him to pilot more stuff in the future and to study his technique, I guess. And so they start putting him into these simulations, and he's like pretty rusty at first. It takes him a little while to get going again, but eventually he starts cooking, and he's really, really good at fighting again the way that he was in the first book. And I think it's been about a decade since he was pulled out of the pilot capsule at the end of Androne. And so it takes him a little bit of time to get back up to speed, but not too long. And the whole time he just follows orders. He doesn't rebel. He doesn't ask for anything because he wants to bank his goodwill with the NSA so that he can ask to be able to see his girlfriend and his daughter again. Just a picture or maybe a video chat or something like that. And so this is the thing that's been getting Paxton through the years, is the idea of like his daughter is out there somewhere, his old girlfriend is still out there, and he loves them, and he's really clinging to that. That's the only thing that's giving him hope about the future. And it's interesting to me, like this brings things back around to how they were in the first book, that he doesn't really understand what they're trying to accomplish with the military simulations that they're putting him through. And he doesn't care because he just wants to have this connection with his family. And so once again, he's back to having kind of no moral integrity, even though he was trying to help the people in the future in the previous book, and he made this commitment to protecting harmony. He's not worried about that anymore. The only thing he's focused on is this connection to his family and trying to like get back in touch with them somehow. And so work is just like it is a separate moral universe from the rest of the interior moral universe that the worker has. And that was a theme in Androne, and it's back here in Alliance. And it speaks to the kind of alliance that we make personally with the places that we work, where maybe our own internal moral compass does not align with the goals of the company, but it doesn't matter because we have our own personal goals, and the money and other things that the business provides for us can facilitate those goals. And so we're willing to compromise morally to achieve those personal goals. So the book just kind of symbolically dramatizes that in the story with his relationship to the NSA. But there's a lot of people who are telling him that like, oh, you're the greatest of all time and you're amazing and people are going to worship you in the future and there's a religion built around you. And all of that's pretty weird. And we're also simultaneously getting these other scenes in the future where we find out there's all these different religions and groups who are organized around modern day brands. And so you have people who, when they go into battle, they have a flag that has the Nike swoosh on it, or that has the Apple logo from Apple computers on it, and on like that. And so a lot of our modern culture persists in the future, but in a completely different context. And so there's a misunderstanding, like what was happening early on in the book, where they're like, oh, Harmony's coming to try and save you. There's a misunderstanding in the people of the future about the context of the past as well. And so this miscommunication, this inability to communicate across time because of the difference in language and culture is a rift that sits at the heart of the paradox of the condition of war. And so like it seems as if everything is at peace here, but there is this religion out there that is kind of built around Paxton that people are telling him about, called the Million Men, or the Eternal Man, or the Everlasting Man. There's a lot of different translations of it because, again, they don't speak English or any language that we speak in the future. They speak versions of computer code. And so all of the information being translated back is always an imperfect translation. But something about Paxton speaks to a kind of reproducible potency for people in the future. And this group, what they end up doing is when all of the satellites came down, they were able to successfully capture one of the satellites before it disintegrated or hit the ground and was destroyed. So they have an intact satellite that they completely repair, and then they're going to launch it back up into the atmosphere, which is going to reconnect the NSA and the military across the globe to the future at that point. And so if you remember at the end of Androne, his Spartan that he's piloting gets taken out of commission by the EMP, and then it's only like 2 seconds for him, and there's like a jump forward in time of 12 years, and then he's able to pilot the same Spartan. It's going to be a similar kind of circumstance. The satellite is out of commission, but once this satellite goes back up, then their connection is reestablished, and they're going to be able to continue the war as if, there was no time skip. And so we go back to Hope, who finds out about this satellite launch, and she goes to try to stop it. Or not Hope, Harmony is her name. And the whole time, her companion, is like getting more and more of a personality. I'm not remembering her name. Sorry about that. And her entire thing, the way that she was raised, was about learning about the future because they worship time and the future and stuff like that. And so she knows exactly the quest that they're on and exactly how it's supposed to go. And she keeps telling Harmony that, like, hey, I'm not supposed to be on this quest with you. I know all about this quest, and it's not supposed to happen this way. And so there's something that's off about the determinism of time in the story. And so the entire premise of the previous book was that, the 99 happens, and then the military industrial complex kind of strikes back at the future and tries to prevent that event from ever happening by destroying Peacemaker before she can commit the act that causes the 99 to happen. But in so doing, they create the motivation for Peacemaker to commit the 99 in the first place. So if they had never fought back, then the 99 would not have happened. And so it's like a paradox kind of situation. And it's a recursive kind of cause and effect relationship. Each of them is the cause, each of them is the effect of the other. But what you can see there is that there is no changing anything. Like if either of them was able to affect the kind of outcome that they wanted to do, then it would have negated the original motivation for the action in the first place, which means the action would not have taken place, which would have allowed for the retaliation to invade, if that makes sense. So the reason that Harmony does the 99 is to cripple the past's capability to contact the future and pilot the andrones and commit the war that they're doing. But that attack is the 99, which is why they invent the andrones in the first place. So she causes the war to happen that she's trying to prevent, and then vice versa with the military. So time here is deterministic, and events cannot be changed. There is no change that is possible. And so when this prophetess is explaining to Harmony that she's not supposed to be on this trip, it interrupts the logic of determinism and time. Something is happening that should not be able to happen in her being on this trip. And when we go back to Paxton's time, what we find out is that humanity built this like huge supercomputer. And then the supercomputer was kind of like forecasting into the future different events and trying to come up with like what is military weapons that will be developed in the future, and then countermeasures for those military weapons and countermeasures for the countermeasures, and on and on and on. And it comes to a specific endpoint that is the final invention, the last thing that will be invented in history. And this is a kind of cataclysmic invention. And once they stumbled onto this idea, the government actually shut the program down because they felt that it was too dangerous to allow it to progress, and that the inevitability of this invention could end history and end humanity as we know it. So it would make everything less secure, not more secure. The idea of the military with weapons is always that like a stronger weapon makes you more secure, right? But this would be the strongest weapon of all and would somehow like destabilize reality or the survival of the human species in the future. But the thing that is the final invention is this god of time that is going to be created in the future. And so it's a kind of like collapsing black hole that is very, very small, but extremely stable. And the incredible density and complexity of this black hole becomes conscious somehow. And that is the thing that was communicating through the prophetess and communicating with the Church of Time. This is the God that the Church of Time worships. And this God has an infinite amount of calculatability, like it can calculate all of reality, but it can only calculate the data that it has access to. And so the NSA, what it does is redact and completely eliminate all information having to do with Paxton and the project around Paxton. And for that reason, Paxton is completely invisible to the God of Time, and all of his effects in history of driving the andrones and all of that stuff is unseeable to the God of Time. And so the hope of the government is that in the future, he will be able to somehow contribute to the downfall of this God and free history from the inevitable crisis that this final weapon poses, because it won't be able to factor him into its determinism. And so the determinism of time has an origin point in the creation of this quote unquote God is the point that I'm making. In any case, the infinite men or whatever it is, the million men cult is able to achieve liftoff of their satellite, and Harmony has some missiles that are provided to her by the God. She communicates with the God, and it convinces her to like follow its religion and make an alliance with it, and that it is inevitable and necessary, and that it will give meaning to her life to serve it, and that these guys are trying to bring the war back, and that's a bad thing, and they need to be stopped. And so she tries to use the missiles to shoot down the rocket and stop the launch, but she's unsuccessful. And as soon as the satellite is back up in orbit, all of the andrones all over the place immediately get back up and start working again because they're getting command signals from the satellite. And so the war starts over again. And the God of Time starts producing its own andrones and its own countermeasures to the army from the past in an effort to defend itself from the attack that it calculated and knew was going to happen. So in a way, it's all going according to the God's plan, but in another way, it can't anticipate Paxton and his ability to drive the andrones. And indeed, as the battles unfold for the rest of the book, Paxton slowly makes progress, but it is progress against the hordes of robots. And he comes to understand that like what he thought was a simulation in the beginning is actually him fighting these like impossibly huge armies all by himself, and that every other androne in his own army is also piloted by him. And this is why in the future he's worshipped as the infinite man, because he's kind of like piloting a million drones simultaneously because of the way that the deferral signal works in the satellite, to be like all of these people all at once, all of these andrones, all of these robots simultaneously. And so he is like a million men in one, and he is the best drone pilot ever. And so he is infinitely potent in that way. At the same time, he finds a note from his former co-pilot because they tried to use her first before getting him out of jail. And she eventually ended up killing herself because she realized what was going on, and she realized that they were just never going to let her get away and have her own life, that it was just going to be endless war forever and ever and ever. And I think this whole thing speaks to the industrialization of warfare in the modern condition of like driving drones from halfway around the world right? Because industrialization is a kind of endless repetition of product. And so what we want to do, we want to maximize the ideal product and like figure out what is the best tasting this, what is the best working gadget that, and then reproduce that thing as much as possible in order to sell it to the market. And it's the same thing with the military. You want to produce effective soldiers, but the problem with soldiers is that when you use them in war, they end up getting injured or killed. And so that resource is spent and gone. But with drone warfare, the soldier who is piloting the drone doesn't get injured and they're able to just simply pilot a new drone. And so you're able to reproduce the competence and even increase the competence of the soldier despite failure on the field. And so this is a true industrialization of the knowledge of soldiering and kind of illustrates the direction of the future of warfare, probably, that we're going to be able to largely reproduce the effectiveness of particular soldiers who are especially good at drone piloting. And so in the case, this is like dramatized and literalized in the story by Paxton piloting simultaneously 50 million andrones in coordinated maneuvers across the battlefield. So his entire life becomes about piloting these drones, and he doesn't get to have any of the actual things that a human being needs, like companionship, affection, friendship, and all of these kind of relationships. Everything is oriented towards work and towards accomplishing the goals of war. And so he's very dispirited by finding this note from his former co-pilot, and he confronts the NSA about it. They say that it's true and that he is piloting actual drones in the future, and this is not like a simulation the way that he was telling himself, and that all of it is real, and that it's extremely necessary, and that it's already a scripted part of history. Once again, it's like already determined. But they also explain to him the way in which he has been stricken from the record, and that how this gives them an edge in this fight against an entity that seems to be all-knowing. In the same way as Paxton repeats these battles again and again and again, his experience stacks on itself, and he himself becomes an almost all-knowing god, in the same way that, like, if you play a lot of video games and you play the same level over and over and over, and you just repeat it, you memorize everything that happens, you attain a kind of godlike ability to perfectly dodge and fight back against everything that's happening, that if somebody just watched you after many, many attempts do the perfect quote unquote run of the level, they'd be like, wow, that was incredible. You're so good at this. But the truth is that it took a lot of failure to achieve that state. And that's what Paxton has done. He's failed so many times with so many andrones that now he has perfected how to fight these battles and all the way up to fight this entire war. And so Harmony gets stuck in the middle of this battlefield once the andrones all get up, and she recognizes something in the andrones that was in her own Spartan that she made friends with as a little girl and that she was so attached to in the previous book. And so she can sense that there's someone piloting this on the other side that is the same person that was piloting her drone. And so she trusts them and feels a connection. And indeed, Paxton sees her through the androne communication, and he's very surprised to see her, but very happy. And he had been losing hope, and he'd been losing the drive to continue fighting the war, with it just looked like his future was going to be nothing but hopeless war forever and ever, just work forever and ever. But now here's somebody that he cares about, and it gives him a new verve and energy to protect her, basically becomes his primary mission. And so he doesn't care about the government's goals or the NSA's goals anymore. He gives himself his own goal of once again protecting Harmony like he did in the past. And Harmony makes it her mission to confront the god of time face to face, if you will. And so they devise a strategy together. And like all of this should not have been possible because her going on this whole quest and everything, her mother was going to prevent it by training her sister Gemini to assassinate her at the key moment when she decides to go confront this god. But Gemini can't do it, and she instead commits suicide. And so Harmony is more motivated in the memory of her sister Gemini and in the light of her sacrifice, which reminds her of the sacrifice of the Androne at the end of the previous book. To like honor that sacrifice, she's going to need to make it through and stop this god from doing whatever it's trying to do of taking over history. And so basically they work together, they make an effective battle plan, and they make it to the god of time. And in this whole thing, Paxton has been not allowed to see his girlfriend and his daughter, but instead has been given companionship of paid sex workers through the military, which he is not excited about, but he does take. And then each of these women who visit him end up getting pregnant, and he even sleeps with his boss, his NSA boss, and she gets pregnant. And all of these progeny of his, including his daughter, create a lineage through time that because he's been removed completely from the record, all of these people also are invisible to this god of time. It can't factor in the information and choices that they will make. And so they sit outside of the determinism of the singularity. And it turns out that Harmony's choice of this particular prophetess of the Church of Time, who keeps saying, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm not supposed to be here, she is one of the people in that lineage. And so is Harmony herself. Harmony is descended from Paxton. And so they cannot be accounted for by the god of time, which means that the god of time is vulnerable to them. And for both of them to be on this mission together increases their chances of being able to take the god on. And indeed, they are able to finally destroy it or break its connection with our reality, or however you kill a black hole. I'm not sure how that works, but they managed to do it. And this ends the time war completely, and also kind of like flips the paradox and the dialogical state that the first book introduced into a kind of retrograde. And so there was nothing, war could do nothing but reproduce itself in the previous book, and peace was only available to come out of love and empathy. And that was the only thing that was like worth living for. War would only make life miserable, and love would make life worth living. It was the only thing worth protecting. But in this book, when you fight a war for love, then the end product becomes peace. And so there's a kind of resolution to the dialogue between these cause and effect forces, that the outcome of the interlocked cause and effect forces is a resolution, an alliance, a peace between them, and a peace that lasts long into the future. And so we get a glimpse of society after all of the battles and how humanity is able to start picking things back up. And it's not an end to institutions, but the claim that the singularity was the final invention of all of humanity seems to have been transcended. there is no end of history here. History persists, human creativity continues, people continue to love and to have hope and faith. And so there are things worth living for, and that war can be fought and achieved a victory through that doesn't just reproduce more war. And so we see Harmony in the future as a mechanic, and the final androne that can be piloted in the future comes and finds her and delivers to her a keepsake photograph showing Paxton and his family have been reunited in the past, and that she is a descendant of Paxton's, reaffirming the connection that they had throughout time and showing the bonds of family and love and how those were produced by the war, but also transcended the war and were the foundation of peace and the future itself. And so there's a happy ending to the big science fiction story. And I think Worrell kind of illustrates the ways in which war emphasizes while it cheapens life, it emphasizes all of the things about life that make life worth living and throws into high contrast the value of life and love and empathy and friendship and all of these things. So as grim as the book is at various times, I think that grimness serves as a contrast to moments like this in the ending, where it affirms that all of humanity is really a family that is connected through time, and that the things that we do in the present affect the past and the future simultaneously for us in our experience. And our understanding of the past and our intentions towards the future are part of what make life worth living if we're willing to make the commitment and take the responsibility for those circumstances. And so that's the science fiction duology by Dwain Worrell that poses this interesting meditation on the workplace and warfare and the future of humanity and religion and products and rappers even. So it's a lot of fun. It's really interesting. It has a lot more depth than you might guess when you start reading the series.